Hi, my name's Phil. I like talking about politics. In this video, I'd like to discuss this week's polling trends and consider whether or not the Conservatives actually managed to make up some of the losses with their party conference. Just kidding. It was an absolute disaster. And if anything, the polls are even worse for the Tories right now. They're knackered. But first, if you'd like to be notified of daily news and politics, please subscribe to the channel and click the bell notification icon. So last week was a bruising affair for the Tories in the polls. The pollsters who conducted their fieldwork after midweek, you know, the Truss local radio interviews and so on, were showing 30-point leads for Labour over the Conservatives. It seemed to be a combination of several factors. First was the fact that the Labour Party conference went very well, lots of positive news coming out of it. Second was the continued fallout from Kwarteng's mini-budget, something that Starmer keeps calling the kamikaze budget whenever anyone will let him have the chance. And third, Liz Truss's disastrous local radio station interviews last Wednesday. It was a perfect storm and created a poll rating collapse for the Tories and a huge boost for Labour. But could it last? I mean, it shouldn't have done. This week, it was the Tory party conference. Very easy to stage manage. They don't have awkward debates like the Labour conference. It's all just very polite little speeches and discussions, really. Occasionally, someone holds up the odd flag. This was the chance for the Conservatives to claw something back in the polls. It was such a collapse the week before. Surely you'd have expected something. The intervention of the Bank of England had worked to prop up the value of the pound. Wasn't that something? They could make lots of popular policy promises at the conference if they wanted to, get a lot of positive headlines. Instead, they chose to descend into further chaos, the end result of which was a poll from Redfield and Wilton coming out yesterday, which showed the Conservatives didn't gain at all in their polling at all. Dan Hodges of the Daily Mail said that Truss would take this as a win. But what's he smoking? If the Tories cannot get any sort of bounce back, even 1 point in the polls during their party conference, a few days after a huge collapse, when will they be able to? It was nothing less than a disaster, but the party polling was only the tip of the iceberg. Underneath, there was way worse news. But before I get onto some of that, a little look across to YouGov. There's lots of polling companies going to be producing lots of stuff. And I know YouGov are going to be producing a lot of stuff over the weekend. At the time of recording this, there's one that popped up on Thursday that blew me away. It shows that Labour are 13 points ahead of the Conservatives among rural voters. Rural voters, that's it. The Conservatives might as well pack up and go home. Even as Johnson's government was collapsing in a maelstrom of public disapproval, the Conservatives retained a large lead over Labour amongst this voter base. Of course they did. These are not the people who vote Labour. They're the people who, even when they don't approve of the Conservatives, at most will stay home. They won't vote Labour. They hate Labour. Not now. The difference now is absolutely staggering. This poll alone, out of all the others, should be a massive wake-up call to the Tories. All of their safest seats, all of them, are largely down to rural voting populations. And it's Labour that has overtaken them, not the Lib Dems. Rural Tory voters flipping to Labour. If that isn't a sign that a key Tory demographic wants the government gone, I do not know what is. Because that's the thing. Most people just look at the overall poll ratings, but you need to drill down to see the real picture. Without proportional representation, the overall voting intention is not what you get in a general election in terms of seats in Parliament. It's quite limited. But underneath it all, the picture is increasingly grim for Conservative MPs. So back to that Redfield polling now. And although it doesn't show any movement for the main parties over the course of the conference, it did have some shifts on personalities, at least. Over the course of the conference, Liz Truss lost 11 points and Kwasi Kwarteng 14 points on personal approval ratings. Both are now on minus 44. In comparison, Starmer's on plus 7. And that went up this week. He also carried out a series of interviews on local radio stations yesterday with considerably more success than Truss did the week before. And Starmer's not that good at interviews, in my opinion. I don't think he's been a politician long enough to develop his skills. But he was on top of his brief, he was prepared for the questions he'd be asked, and he was prepared with the messages he wanted to get out there. So during the carefully stage-managed Conservative Party conference, the Tory leader and Chancellor, the two people right at the head of government, suffered a further collapse in their approval rating, and Starmer gained. All of those right-wing muppets lauding Truss's brilliant speech, oh, bro, I'll get the public back on board. If it was brilliant, how come her approval rating hit the deck and the leader of the Labour Party gained? That's how bad her speech really was. Never mind the pundits who are paid to clap like seals. That's how bad it really was. Now, I'll link the analysis for you in the description below. I will just caution against some of their conclusions because I think sometimes it lacks context here and there. For example, they show how Truss has collapsed confidence in the Red Wall. Even compared to Johnson, they're saying Johnson still had decent approval there. Yes, he was going to lose them, but he still had decent approval there. Truss completely collapsed it. But the thing is, Boris Johnson made a particular strategy of attracting Red Wall support. It was a good short-term plan. When Labour weren't even challenging marginal Tory seats, go on the attack. You know, if your stronghold isn't under threat, go on the attack to your opponent's stronghold. Anyone who's ever played an RTS game knows that. Johnson had lost enough support amongst this tentative group of voters with a combination of his personal behaviour and his failures to deliver on levelling up promises. But it's worth pointing out, Truss has made no attempt to curry their favour. Now, I don't know what electoral strategy Truss has. I don't actually know if she even has one. But it is possible to adopt a strategy whereby you do abandon the Red Wall back to Labour and chase the seats that Cameron won a majority with in 2015. In other words, it is possible for a Tory leader to largely abandon the Red Wall in order to tilt back towards traditional Conservative areas. In some ways, it's very risky, but it can make sense. Like Johnson's promise to the Red Wall was essentially massive state intervention. Not strictly speaking socialist policies, but certainly left-wing. The Tories were never in a million years going to deliver on them. And by even claiming to, they were annoying their Conservative base in the south of England who didn't fancy being taxed to pay for a redistribution of wealth up north. So sure, Truss could leave the Red Wall in order to focus on the Blue Wall. The problem is she's pissed those off as well, so it's not really credible. But in theory, she could be targeting a very different type of voter to Johnson, and so a collapse in support amongst one group that Johnson chased doesn't mean her overall strategy is doomed. The thing that means her overall strategy is doomed is that she's cocking everything up. She's not gaining amongst any groups, and she's losing loads. She's lost the rural vote, for goodness sake. So let's look at the situation right now. Both Truss and Kwarteng have very negative net approval ratings. Starmer's into positive territory. Not that it really matters. What matters is the comparison. Starmer is way above the net approval rating of Liz Truss. Labour are considered more trustworthy than the Tories on the economy. That is a massive issue when it comes to elections. Even getting rid of Truss is unlikely to solve that because the country is heading into a recession. Besides, who replaces her? If it's either Sunak or Johnson, it just means the people who created the conditions for recession are back in charge. That's not going to impress the public. Penny Mordaunt might have a better chance. She's not particularly tainted. But she'll still have to deal with a desperately crumbling economy and still try to pretend to push Conservative policies, which are the last thing you want in tough times. But I can discuss the dire straits that the Tories find themselves in another video this weekend, maybe. Might even update with further polls, because the ones emerging over the course of this afternoon, just before I've recorded this, actually show an increase in the margin between Labour and the Conservatives. But for now, what's happened is the Tory party conference was about clawing some of that poll collapse back, and it went the other way. One poll has them gaining not a single point back, which is bad enough, but others emerging show the gap widening. And it's not like the bad news has finished now for the government either. It's not like they'll have a few weeks where they can take the initiative again. They're going to continue to reap the whirlwind next week. People are starting to read about winter blackouts. I might talk about that tomorrow. And the worst news of all for the Tories, Liz Truss is leading them through the storm. Good luck with that. But those are my thoughts. Let me know yours in the comments below. Hope you found the video interesting. If you did, please click the like button. If you'd like to support the channel further, the join button for memberships. And until next time, I'll see you later.